Hey, Francis. When we talk about contractions and feelings, and I think there is, like, the contraction itself, it's like the smallest part of it, and then the layers of resistance you put upon the contraction and the thoughts, and the beliefs, and are the biggest and more, they're like the biggest part of it. Can you say something about these layers of resistance upon the feeling itself? How to whatever handle it? Or
You have to take the heat because they pretend they are going to kill you. That if you keep relaxing, if you keep surrendering, it's not going to be good. And it's true, it's not going to be good for the sense of separation. The good news, you are not this stupid sense of separation. So for you, it's not going to.
so how do you handle that? For example, you are having a conversation or whatever, and suddenly a feeling appears for whatever reason, and immediately on top of that, thoughts or this is going to happen, this is whatever. I mean, how do you handle this when this is happening like immediately and you have no?
All these feelings are about the person we believe to be.
Yeah, they talk about a person and what it is going to happen to this person and what is.
Yes, and so the best way would be to question this person, to see first to see that the origin of this, what you call feelings, which is in fact a negative emotion. It's not what I call feeling; it's a negative emotion. The negative emotion comes from the belief to be a separate person. You see, so if you can connect the occurrence of those negative, or those episodes of negative emotions with resuming the self-investigation. Every time it arises, you know, because you have been informed, that the only reason this negative emotion arises is because you believe to be a separate consciousness dependent upon the body. Right? So now that you have been informed about that, you can check it out that it is true, that every time this emotion wouldn't arise unless you would believe that consciousness is dependent upon the body. And then question it. Say, what's the evidence? So that may seem to, because you see, if you just want to get rid of this state, which is unpleasant, you are still being victimized by it, because you are doing exactly what the state wants you to do, which is to believe it to be true. You are still attached to the problem. I know that it seems far-fetched to conduct an investigation that seems to be philosophical and ethereal somehow, while facing an emotion. But if you take a closer look, you will be that there is a very close connection between the belief to be a separate consciousness and the response, the response of fear and resistance that it triggers in the body.
I see that.
Whatever you try to do about the contraction itself would be trying to get rid of the symptoms. And trying to get rid of the symptoms really will only increase the symptoms. It's better to address directly the root cause of it.
But we also deal with the symptoms in the body work, for example, right?
No, you are misunderstanding what we do with the body work. You see, with the body work, we don't deal with the negative emotions that are a consequence of the thought of the belief of being separate. We are dealing with the feeling of self, of the sense of me, which is not painful, which is not something that we want to get rid of. It's something nice, cute, that we love. So the fact that you are telling me about things that are unpleasant, you see, that's not... You know the distinction I make between the feeling, the sense of me, which is cute, nice, etc. We are attached to it. We want to keep it. It's not unpleasant. Down the road, it triggers the thought of me, the belief to be separate, and then that triggers the fear. And then the fear is the emotion that is triggered by ignorance, and that is the unpleasant element. You see? So, in your case, I've told you already once that because you have a good intellectual approach and good intellectual grasp of things, it is better for you to approach it through the path of knowledge, through the path of understanding. And that will eventually bring about peace. In this peace, the body will relax, the fears will vanish.
When you you mean understanding. It's
understanding, which means the investigation that seems to be intellectual about how...
Through the thought?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. But then, when these emotions are triggered, you say, you should investigate.
Get rid of the desire to get rid of the emotions. Get rid of the desire to get rid of the emotion. You are completely asphyxiated by this desire. You are completely taken. That's the only thing that no, let go of that.
How?
Be interested. There is a path that can liberate you from that, but you have to use your intelligence. You have to allow for your intelligence to trump your feelings.
But that gets somehow corrupted, but unclear when these emotions come up. So it's like, so there's no way out. On the one hand, the emotions don't let you. You don't have like space or to think clearly or to to apply.
Yeah. So let's assume that to be true, because when you say that, it means that you have already considered defeat.
So
you have not.
I don't understand. Right.
You have
defeat, yeah, but
before beginning the match, you have said already, "I surrender." So of course you're cooked. You have to fight the match. You may lose.
No, I'm asking you. I mean, when you feel that emotions and the layers upon the emotions, and you cannot really, you don't have space. You don't feel space to investigate, or what can I do?
No. Then too bad. Too bad. That's the bad news. You allow yourself to be the victim. That's your choice. You don't want to fight the match. You concede, you lose. That's the bad news. The good news is that you don't lose forever. So there is going to be a moment down the road of availability, and a moment when you will be
Sure, there is.
available for the self-inquiry, and then the self-inquiry will resume and will play its part and erode a little bit the root cause for these episodes of fear. But the process would become extremely more efficient, accelerated, if you would be able to link the self-inquiry to the detection of such an episode. Are you following me? In other words, every time you detect such an episode of fear, you would automatically use it as a trigger for, how do I know that I am a separate consciousness? Then that becomes very potent. You accelerate enormously because then ignorance has no way out, has no option. If no episode comes up, then gradually this habit gets erased. Because a habit which doesn't get repeated gets forgotten. If ignorance shows up, is allowed to come to the foreground as this fear, then it triggers the investigation that poisons it. So that ignorance is taken between a rock and a hard place. If it doesn't come up, it gets erased. If it comes up, it gets zapped. But since you are not yet using the zapping power, the only thing that you have is the eraser. You don't have the zapper, you only have the eraser.
So can you repeat a little bit about what about asking the validity of the separate self?
Of the separate consciousness, right? Consciousness.
Okay.
Consciousness is what you are, that which is hearing these words, right? In ignorance, and that's that which we are naturally attached to, because that's our reality, that's our centrality. The rest is just a dream. That's the only real part of the dream. Now, if we believe that this consciousness is dependent upon elements of the dream, like the body, the world, etc., for its very existence, because the elements of the dream are impermanent, the result is that consciousness is impermanent, and therefore fear arises, and it is a fear which is desperate, because the only way to abolish this fear would be for the objects to become permanent, which is not possible. Right? So that's the situation we are in ignorance, as a predicament, in ignorance that there is no way out. We are doomed. We are cooked. Most people, we all know it, We all know it, but most people just don't want to face the music, don't want to face it. Fortunately, there is a way out, and it is the fact that it is not a done deal, that it is not a sure thing that consciousness is dependent upon the body-mind, upon the elements of the dream. So the investigation is precisely the investigation of this point. How do I know? What is the evidence that shows that consciousness is dependent on something else for its very existence? What is the evidence that shows that consciousness, for instance, has a beginning in time? Because we believe, if we have a strong fear, it means that we have a strong belief that that is the case, since that's the only reason to be afraid. The only real cause for fear is that consciousness could disappear. So it's important to master your emotions. Often in the spiritual literature, we find the prerequisite for the truth seeker. And often the prerequisites are translated or understood as, to master the senses. To master the senses. And what is usually understood by that is not to eat good stuff, not to have sex, not to have any kind of pleasure. That's what is meant by mastering the senses. That's not at all what is meant. Really, what is important is to master the feelings. In other words, to have our understanding and love for the truth trample, dance on top of our feelings. Just run over the feelings. That's what it means. It's about mastering the feelings. Which feelings? The feeling of separation. Through love, through understanding. And it's a way of telling our feelings, okay, you're there, I'm not listening. You can scream as hard as you want. I'm not listening. I don't care. Keep screaming. At some point you'll stop. There is an Arabic saying that says, the dogs bark and the caravan passes by. Meaning the dog barks, but the camels and the people on the caravan, they couldn't care less about the barking of the dogs. So the barking dogs are the feelings. And the caravan is the reason, the love, the intelligence.
Would you recommend to follow your previous understandings? Like,
Yes, yes.
Like a
Absolutely. Trust your understanding.
When everything else is...
Yeah, trust, yes. Use your understanding as your refuge. You know, in the Buddhist traditions, they have the three refuges. One of them is the Dharma. And the Dharma corresponds really, it's not the Dharma which is not understood, it's the Dharma which has been understood. And that your understanding is the Dharma. So you follow your Dharma, yes.
For example, if you at some point have an insight that, I don't know, life is like a dream, to follow that and to, don't take too serious life when you are in the heat of emotions. Oh, it's just
if that's your understanding, but I wouldn't formulate that in this way. Remember that this understanding is about consciousness. And the understanding I'm talking about is the fact that there is no evidence that consciousness is mortal.
Yeah.
There is no evidence that consciousness is dependent upon the body. Everything we perceive is dependent upon consciousness in our perception. Given that fact, it is impossible to reach any certainty that consciousness is dependent upon anything else, which is what we believe when we are afraid. So in other words, we are afraid, but we have no reason, no solid reason to be afraid. We have for many years been afraid because we have always taken the same side of the issue, which is the issue is consciousness dependent upon the body or not? We have always chosen to answer yes, consciousness is dependent upon the body. So for a change, why not be in not knowing? Since we cannot know, it's not rational to make the decision consciousness is dependent upon the body. There is no evidence. Consciousness as I define it. Why always decide that it is dependent upon the body? In the absence of evidence, that's the point. Can you understand that? That you have no evidence that consciousness is dependent upon the body. If you cannot understand that, then the investigation I'm talking about is trying to find out whatever evidence there is that leads me to the conclusion that consciousness is dependent upon the body. Since I seem to be so certain that consciousness, that when the body dies, consciousness dies, that consciousness is dependent upon the body or upon something else, such, I don't know, God. What's the evidence? Because after all, it would be sad to live my life in fear, only to find out at the end that it was not the case. It would be a waste of time. Consciousness knows its reality. Consciousness knows its independence. And the fear we have is simply a conflict, the sign of a conflict between what consciousness deeply knows, its eternity, its limitlessness, and the views of ignorance we have adopted. So there is an inherent conflict that manifests as fear. Fear is only a mechanism in the body whereby the body fights for its survival. There is no problem with this mechanism. It's wired in the body, it is functional. The problem that this fear, this mechanism, which is perfect, functional, nothing needs to be changed, is triggered for no good reason out of some belief system which is purely an imagination. So that's psychological fear versus real fear, or that's ignorant fear versus real fear. Animals are not subjected to this ignorant fear. You see? They don't create this image of themselves as a separate entity. So that's why there is a danger, a predator in the area. You look at the animals around here, and immediately they are on alert and they experience fear. Because this state of alert is the result of an experience of fear. And they are ready to fight, etc. Now the hawk flies away. Next moment, the little bird or the squirrel jumps around and does business as usual. No memory of the past moment of fear, you see. Whereas we keep this background of fear all the time because of this chronic disease of ignorance. Now, this chronic disease of ignorance sometimes creates outbursts, acute episodes. So, to sum it up, whenever you are interested in the truth, like coming here, asking questions, just follow it. Follow reading a book about it, meditating, whatever. Follow your love for the truth. Whenever you experience one of these episodes of fear, try to go to the rational investigation.
It's not fear, actually. So not so much the fear, it's just resistance and something is not right. So, a negation. Negation of
if it smells like fear, if it looks like fear, if it feels like fear, You can call it resistance.